The detective had interviewed hundreds of witnesses in her career. She had sat across from CEOs, from grieving parents, from men who cried and men who didn't, and men who tried to do both at once. She had learned, over 22 years, to read a room before she read a person. She had never needed to read a stuffed rabbit before. The girl placed it on the desk without being asked. A small brown rabbit with one ear slightly lower than the other and a worn patch on its belly where it had been held too many times. And then she looked up at Detective Sonia Marsh with the particular calm of a child who has already made up her mind about something and is simply waiting for the adult across the table to catch up. Buttons heard everything, the girl said. He was there the whole time. In the observation room behind the one-way glass, two men went completely still. One of them was Detective Marsh's supervising lieutenant, who had seen the contents of the warrant request 40 minutes earlier and had signed it in under a minute, which was not something he was known to do. The other was the girl's father, a man who had spent the last 4 days convinced he understood exactly what had happened in his own home, who had fired a woman he'd trusted for 8 years, who had purchased an engagement ring 6 weeks earlier and worn the particular blindness of a man in love like a second coat he'd stopped noticing he had on. Nathan Cole had one hand pressed flat against the observation glass, and the expression on his face was one Sonia Marsh would describe later in her report with the single word she could find that fit: undone. She would ask for the rabbit before the interview was over. She would find, in the small cavity behind the patch of worn fur on its belly, a cavity the girl's late mother had sewn in as a secret pocket for hiding birthday surprises and folded notes, a memory chip no larger than a thumbnail. In a child's purple case shaped like a star, on that chip were 41 days of recordings. And somewhere in the middle of them, in the flat, unguarded voice of a woman who had believed completely that she was alone, was a confession that would take apart, in under 4 minutes of audio, everything Nathan Cole had spent the last 8 years building and the last 6 weeks destroying. But that morning, Lily Cole had only one question. She looked at the detective with the same eyes she had used to look at everyone since Wednesday night, measuring, patient, older than 6 had any right to be. And she asked, in a voice that barely moved the air, "Can you make sure Rosa comes home?" Rewind 72 hours. The kitchen at the Cole estate smelled the way it always smelled on Tuesday mornings. Coffee, and the faint trace of the orange marmalade Rosa Delgado made herself in small batches every 3rd week because Lily had, at age 4, declared it the only acceptable form of orange and had never revised that position. Rosa was at the counter. Lily was at the table, still in her pajamas, buttons tucked under one arm, eating toast with the marmalade in the careful, methodical way she ate everything. 4 bites per triangle, always starting from the left corner. It was, by every visible measure, a Tuesday. Rosa had worked in this house for 8 years, had arrived the spring before Lily was born, had stayed through the years of Lily's early childhood, and through the long, terrible year of Claire Cole's illness, and through the worse year after, when the house had gone so quiet that Rosa had taken to leaving the radio on, in whichever room she was cleaning, just to give Nathan something to walk toward when he came home. She had stayed because the work was fair, and because the house had needed her, and because Lily, from the age of approximately 11 days, had regarded Rosa with the absolute, uncomplicated trust of someone who had decided, before she had the words to say so, that this was a person who would not let her fall. Rosa did not think of herself as family. She thought of herself as someone who had been given the privilege of watching a small, particular person grow up, and she treated that privilege the way she treated most things she valued, quietly, without calling attention to it, with a steadiness she had learned early was the most reliable form of love she had to offer. She had not liked Camille Voss from the first week. She could not have explained it in terms that would have satisfied Nathan, who was not a man who responded well to vague instincts, whose entire professional life was built on the idea that structures stood or fell based on evidence rather than feeling. So she had said nothing. filing her discomfort in the same drawer she filed most things she had no actionable reason to raise, and watching, as the weeks of Nathan's relationship with Camille passed, for the specific shape of the thing she suspected she was seeing. She had found it gradually, in details small enough to dismiss individually, and unmistakable, in aggregate. The way Camille's voice changed when Nathan left the room, dropping from warm to neutral, the way a lamp dims on a slow dial. The way she looked at Lily, not with the careful attention of someone genuinely interested in a child, and not even with the ordinary indifference of someone who simply didn't connect with children, but with something that resembled, if Rosa was honest with herself, the measuring glance of a person calculating how much of an obstacle a thing was going to be. She had noticed the way Camille noticed the house, not with appreciation, but with inventory. She had noticed, too, the way Camille managed Nathan's attention, not by competing with it, but by redirecting it. Every time Rosa was in a room, Camille found a reason to draw Nathan toward another one. Every time Lily mentioned Rosa by name in conversation, Camille introduced a small reframe, a gentle concern about dependency, a carefully worded observation about the importance of a child developing relationships outside the household staff, nothing sharp enough to quote back to anyone, always delivered in the tone of someone raising a loving concern rather than planting a doubt. Rosa watched it happen over 3 months with the specific impotence of a person who can see a thing being built against them and cannot stop it because the material it is being built from is nothing more than accumulated suggestion. She had said nothing, she had no evidence, she had a feeling, and Nathan Cole was not a feelings man, and Camille Voss was warm and beautiful and had made him laugh for the first time in 2 years in a way that Rosa had heard from the kitchen and that had made her set down her work for a moment and wish, privately and genuinely, that her instinct was wrong. That Tuesday, the instinct proved itself. It happened in the hour between Lily's breakfast and Rosa's afternoon rounds, during the particular quiet that settled over the house, while Lily napped and Nathan was at a site meeting across town. Rosa was moving through the upstairs hallway with a basket of folded laundry when she heard, through the partially open door of the primary bedroom, Camille's voice, not the warm, modulated voice she used with Nathan, but the other one, flat and efficient, the voice Rosa had heard in small doses for 3 months and never been able to prove existed to anyone else. She was on the phone. "It's not going to be a problem," Camille said. "I'll handle the timeline. The question is whether you can have the valuation done before the filing or if we have to wait until after." A pause. "No, the kid isn't. She's not a factor. She goes to her grandmother's every other month. The school schedule is fixed. There are windows." Another pause. Longer. "The housekeeper's the bigger issue. She's been here forever and the father trusts her more than he trusts anyone. That has to change before we move forward." Rosa stood in the hallway for exactly the length of time it took her to understand what she'd heard, and then she walked, quietly, to the far end of the hall and sat down on the small bench near the linen closet and spent 2 minutes doing something she rarely allowed herself. Thinking carefully about what she did not yet know versus what she did. She did not know the specifics of what Camille was planning. She did not know who had been on the other end of the call, or what the valuation referred to, or what the filing was. What she knew was the phrase, "the housekeeper's the bigger issue," and the phrase that has to change before we move forward. And she knew the voice that had said them. And she knew with the same bone-deep certainty with which she knew most things she had no rational explanation for, that whatever was coming would find a way to make her the instrument of its own arrival. What she did not know, what she had no way of knowing, sitting on that bench with the laundry basket in her lap and the hall silent around her, was that the small brown rabbit was lying on the rug 12 feet behind her, and that its memory chip had been running for the past 2 hours, and that Lily had forgotten to turn it off again. Lily had discovered, approximately 6 weeks earlier, that buttons could record things. The rabbit had been a gift from her mother, assembled from a craft kit the year before Claire Cole died, each piece cut and sewn with the deliberate imprecision of a woman whose hands, by that point, were not entirely steady, but who had decided, in the way she had decided most things in the last year of her life, that the making mattered more than the result. The recording function had been Claire's addition, a small, child-operated chip purchased at a specialty toy store, installed in the belly pocket, so that Lily could record her own voice and play it back to herself, could listen to herself telling stories to the rabbit the way Claire had told them to her. Lily had used it exactly the way her mother intended, recording small, rambling monologues most nights before bed. Stories about what she'd seen that day, questions she'd thought of and hadn't gotten around to asking anyone, observations about the particular behavior of clouds and birds and the way the garden looked after rain. The chip held approximately 60 hours of audio before it began overwriting itself, and Lily, who had never quite mastered the habit of switching it off, tended to leave it running for long stretches of the day while Buttons accompanied her from room to room in his usual position, tucked under her arm, or dropped on the nearest soft surface while she played. She had not set out to record anything. She had simply carried Buttons with her, the way she always did, and Buttons had simply listened, the way it always did, and the chip had been running on the day Camille told someone on a phone call that the housekeeper had to go, and on the day after that, when Camille stood in the kitchen doorway and said, in a voice precisely calibrated to carry just enough distress without appearing theatrical, "Nathan, I found something." The necklace was Camille's. Rosa knew it the moment she saw it, because she had seen it before, in the exact location it was not supposed to be, in the zippered inner pocket of her own coat, hanging on the hook by the back door. A delicate platinum chain with a cluster of diamonds at its center that Camille had been wearing the night before, and that had apparently, by some mechanism Rosa could not explain, migrated from Camille's jewelry case to Rosa's winter coat while Rosa had been in the garden with Lily after school. Camille held it up between two fingers, the light catching the diamonds with the particular clarity of something staged to be seen clearly. And her expression held exactly the right amount of reluctance. A woman who had found something she did not want to have found, delivering news she would rather not deliver. "I didn't want to say anything without being sure," Camille said, looking not at Rosa but at Nathan, the smallest possible directional choice that told Rosa everything about how thoroughly the ground had already been prepared. "I noticed it was missing last week. I thought I'd misplaced it. But I saw Rosa near the coats this morning, and I thought, I'm sorry, I don't want to make accusations. I just needed to check." Nathan looked at Rosa. The look had a quality Rosa had never seen on his face before. Not suspicion, not anger, but something worse than both. The look of a man who is trying, very hard, to find the version of what he's seeing that allows him to keep believing in someone. "Rosa," he said. "It isn't mine," Rosa said, flat, clear, looking directly at him, the way she had looked at him through 8 years of straightforward conversation, because Rosa Delgado did not look away from things she had not done. "I have never touched that necklace. Someone put it there." The silence that followed lasted perhaps 6 seconds, and in those 6 seconds, Rosa watched Nathan's face move through something she would think about for a long time afterward. The almost decision, the internal argument, the moment a person either trusts the evidence in front of them or the person they have known for 8 years, and makes the wrong choice for the most human of reasons, which is that they have invested something they cannot bear to have been wrong about. "I think," Camille said quietly, filling the silence with the care of someone who had planned for it, "we should all take a moment. I'm not calling for anything drastic. I just think some time and some space might—" "I'll go," Rosa said, before she could finish. Not because she was giving up, because she knew, looking at Nathan's face, that the conversation she needed to have with him was not one she could have in this room, with this woman in it, until Nathan had time to think without Camille supplying the words his thoughts were supposed to reach. She was wrong. He didn't give her the time. He called her that evening, and the conversation was short in the way conversations are short when a person has already decided something and is calling not to discuss it, but to deliver it. And afterward, Rosa sat in her car outside her sister's apartment for a long time before going in, not because she was too sad to move, but because she was trying to decide carefully and precisely what her options actually were. She was still in the car when her phone buzzed. Not a call, a text from a number she didn't recognize, 2 sentences long. "I heard what she said on the phone. Buttons knows too. Don't go too far." Rosa stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came after 30 seconds, and it was not 2 sentences, It was one word: Lily. The phone, Rosa realized slowly, was the backup device Nathan kept in the kitchen drawer for Lily to use when she needed to call him from home. A child's emergency phone, locked to 3 contacts, that Lily had apparently, with the particular resourcefulness of a child who had been thinking carefully about a problem, used to text the only person whose number she had memorized, that wasn't her father's. Rosa typed, "Where are you?" The reply came back, "In my room. He doesn't know I'm texting. Buttons has the recording, but I don't know how to get it out." She drove back to the estate at 11:15 that night, parked 2 streets away, and walked to the service gate with a key she had not yet returned, because Nathan, in the conversation that had dismissed her, had not asked for it. She let herself in through the garden entrance and came upstairs quietly, the way she had moved through this house for 8 years, knowing every place the floor shifted under weight, every angle of every door that required a different pressure to open without sound. Lily was awake, sitting up in bed with Buttons in her lap, her face pale with the effort of having been very brave for several hours in a row. When she saw Rosa in the doorway, something in her posture released, the small, involuntary collapse of a child who has been holding a weight that is too heavy and has finally found someone to set it down with. Rosa sat on the edge of the bed. She did not say anything for a moment, because some moments deserve silence first. "She planned it," Lily said. Not a question, not an accusation delivered dramatically, just a flat fact, delivered in the careful, compressed way Lily delivered most things, like someone who had been thinking for a long time about how to say a thing true without making it bigger than it already was. "I heard her on the phone. And then I heard her in the jewelry room. She was talking to herself when she was getting the necklace out. She said—" Lily paused, her mouth tightening briefly. "She said and that should do it." "Did Buttons hear that too?" Lily nodded. Buttons was on the vanity chair. "I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard Camille going into the jewelry room, and I left Buttons there when I went to check, and then I came back to bed because I didn't want to get caught, and I forgot to turn him off." Rosa looked at the rabbit for a long moment. Then she looked at the child. "Do you know how to get to the chip?" Lily turned the rabbit over, ran her finger along the worn patch on his belly, and then pressed carefully on the lower edge of it, where a small, magnetic seam ran along the interior of the pocket Claire had sewn. The patch peeled back. Rosa looked at what was inside, the purple star-shaped case, smaller than her thumbnail, the chip inside it. "Lily," she said, very carefully, "I need you to listen to me. This chip might have evidence on it, real evidence, the kind that a police detective or a lawyer needs to see, not just us. I can't take it with me without telling someone official, and I can't tell someone official without your father knowing. Do you understand?" Lily looked at her with the expression of a person who has already run this calculation and is slightly frustrated that the adult is just now catching up. "I texted you because you know what to do," Lily said. "I don't need you to explain it. I need you to do it." Rosa took the chip in its case. She left the rabbit on the bed, exactly where it had been. She pressed her hand briefly to Lily's forehead, not checking for fever, just the old reflex of making sure a child was real and present and still here. And Lily let her, and then sat back against her pillow with the patient expression of someone who has done the hard part and is ready to let the grown-ups handle the rest. "Don't tell my dad yet," Lily said. "I won't tonight," Rosa said. "But we can't keep it from him for long. He's going to have to know." "I know," Lily said. "I just need you to know first. So there's a plan before he finds out. Because when Dad is upset, he doesn't plan very well." Rosa looked at her for a long moment. 8 years, she thought. 8 years of watching this person become herself, and she was still occasionally startled by the exactness of it. "Get some sleep," Rosa said. "I'll call you tomorrow." She let herself back out through the garden gate at 11:47 and sat in her car 2 streets away and called her nephew, who worked in digital forensics for a private firm, and answered his phone on the second ring when he saw her name, because he had learned, across 30 years of Rosa answering on the second ring when he called her in crisis, that the least he could do was return the habit. She told him what she had, he told her what she needed to do with it. She drove to his office at midnight, and they spent 2 hours copying, cataloging, and verifying the contents of the chip without altering a bite of the original, which her nephew explained, with the patient precision of someone who had made this exact speech before, was the single most important step in making any of it usable. If you alter one timestamp, one file header, one fragment of the metadata, he said, a defense attorney will stand up in court and tell the jury the whole thing was fabricated. The original has to be untouched. It has to look exactly the way a 6-year-old's recording chip looks, which is chaotic, partially overwritten, with background noise and random interruptions, because that's what makes it credible. Evidence that looks too clean gets thrown out. Evidence that looks like a child forgot to turn off her rabbit while eating cereal, that tends to stick. Rosa sat and let him work, watching the waveforms appear on the monitor as he processed each audio segment, the visual language of sound she had no training to read, but that her nephew navigated with the ease of a man reading a map of a city he grew up in. Most of it was exactly what it appeared to be. The gentle ambient noise of a lived-in house, Lily's voice telling stories to herself in the small hours before sleep, the ordinary percussion of doors and footsteps, and the radiator ticking on in the evening. And then, every few days, something else. The first time one of those something elses appeared, her nephew sat up straighter. He did not say anything. He replayed the segment twice, adjusted the audio levels to reduce the background interference, and then looked at Rosa across the monitor. You need to hear this, he said. What they found, in 41 days of ambient recording broken into fragments of varying length. Lily's bedtime stories, her quiet observations, the ordinary audio of a house going about its days, were 3 separate incidents that, taken individually, might have been explained away and taken together, could not. The first was the phone call. Clear enough that individual phrases were immediately audible. The valuation, the filing, the kid isn't a factor, the housekeeper has to go. The voice was Camille's, unmistakable to anyone who had heard it in the warm register and would recognize it immediately in the flat one. The second was the jewelry room. Briefer, but sufficient. The particular sound of a jewelry case drawer, the click of a clasp, and then a voice, the same voice saying, that should do it. 1 day, 2 at most, before he finds it. The third was something Rosa had not anticipated, and it changed the shape of what she thought she was dealing with. It was not from the night of the necklace. It was from 3 weeks earlier, and it was longer, and it was a different kind of conversation. Not a monologue, but what appeared to be a video call. Camille's side only audible, the other voice reduced to a murmur. Camille was sitting in what sounded, from the ambient acoustic, like the primary bedroom, late at night. The conversation began about logistics that were not entirely clear from one side of it, but clarified in fragments into something that made Rosa's nephew stop the playback twice to make sure he had heard it correctly. I know what the original diagnosis said, Camille's voice said, at a particular point in the conversation that Rosa would replay 50 times before morning. I also know what the second opinion said and who suppressed it. That's not your problem anymore, that's my leverage. Nobody goes looking at a grief story, and nobody's going to start now. A pause. No, the timeline only works if the estate clears probate before the restructure, which means the engagement has to look real for at least another 4 months. I know what I'm doing. I've been doing it for 2 years. Rosa sat in her nephew's office at 2 a.m, looking at the audio waveform on the monitor, and feeling something move through her that she couldn't immediately name. Something colder than anger and more deliberate than grief. Claire Cole had died of a progressive neurological illness. She had been misdiagnosed twice. The second opinion, the one that had finally identified the disease correctly, had arrived 3 months after her death. Too late, the doctors had said gently, to have changed the outcome even if it had been caught earlier. Rosa was not a detective. She did not know what a suppressed diagnosis meant in legal terms, or whether it constituted a crime, or whether it would ever be provable, or whether the conversation she had just heard meant what she thought it might mean. She knew what her nephew said when she told him what she thought, which was, let the professionals take it from there, Rosa, because this is not something you handle. This is something you hand over and step back from. And you do that tomorrow morning, first thing." She called Detective Sonia Marsh at 8 a.m. on the recommendation of her nephew's firm's legal contact, and by 9:30 she was sitting in a police station conference room across from a woman who had 22 years of experience and who listened to the entirety of what Rosa told her without interrupting once, which was itself a kind of communication. The warrant for Camille Voss's devices and financial records was signed by early afternoon. Nathan Cole was told, by Detective Marsh, in a single direct conversation at 3 o'clock, that his home was part of an active investigation. He was not told everything, he was told enough. Marsh watched his face do the same thing Rosa had watched it do the day before. The internal argument, the almost decision, but this time, with different evidence on the table. The thing his face landed on was not the wrong choice. He asked to see Lily. Marsh brought him to the observation room and let him watch his daughter place a stuffed rabbit on the detective's desk and tell a woman she had met 40 minutes ago that Buttons had heard everything. He stood with one hand pressed flat against the glass for the first several minutes of the interview, the physical instinct of a man trying to stay upright, while the architecture of his own life rearranged itself beneath him without warning. He had built things for 30 years, structures designed to last, to hold weight, to stand without apology against the ordinary forces that tried to bring things down. And he was discovering, standing in a police observation room on a Thursday afternoon, that he had missed the most important structural failure of his life, because he had been looking in exactly the wrong direction. He thought about Claire, about the week she'd died, about the particular agony of the second opinion that had come too late to change anything, delivered by a specialist who had apologized, in the careful language of medical professionals calibrating blame, for the delay in the referral. He thought about Camille, who had appeared in his life 7 months after the funeral, charming and warm and attentive in the way that grief makes a person especially vulnerable to, because grief opens the places where a person used to be held and makes them crave, almost physically, the sensation of being known again. He had thought, finding her, that he had gotten lucky. Standing at the observation glass, he thought about what the word lucky was actually worth, and found it was worth almost nothing. He did not cry. He would cry later, alone, in the car, in the particular private way of a man who has been raised to believe that public feeling is an imposition on others but has enough of his father's emotional vocabulary to know that what he is carrying has to go somewhere. He would cry later, and then he would stop, and then he would think about what came after. He was a builder. After had always been the direction he understood best. The interview with Lily was short, careful, conducted with a specialist present, and produced nothing that the chip hadn't already given them. But what it produced that the chip couldn't was Lily herself, the particular quality of her composure, the way she answered each question with the same flat, direct honesty she brought to everything. The moment near the end, when she looked at the one-way glass with the precise expression of someone who knows they are being watched through it and said, unprompted, "Daddy, you can come in now. I'm not scared anymore." Nathan came in. He sat beside his daughter, who did not hug him right away, not from coldness, but from the instinct of a child who is managing several large feelings carefully and does not want to let them out all at once in a room with people she doesn't entirely know. She took his hand. She held the rabbit with her other arm. "That was enough," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't listen." Lily looked at him for a moment, with the measuring patience she had clearly inherited from no one and developed entirely on her own. "You listened when it mattered," she said, and then, after a brief pause, "but you need to get better at it." From the observation window, Detective Marsh allowed herself a small, private smile. Camille Voss was arrested at the Cole estate 4 hours later, while her belongings were in the process of being systematically and efficiently packed, which the detective would later note, in a dry addendum to her report, suggested the arrest had not entirely surprised the subject. The charges filed were fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The necklace, the estate manipulation, the documented financial scheme with a co-conspirator, the phone records quickly identified as Camille's former business partner, a man who had reason to want Cole Architecture's valuation restructured before a corporate filing that would have exposed a conflict of interest he had spent 2 years engineering. The question of the diagnosis, of what, exactly, Camille had known about Claire Cole's illness, and when she had known it, and what the phrase suppressed second opinion actually meant in the context of a medical timeline that had already been sealed by a coroner's report, was referred to a separate investigative unit, one with a different kind of authority. Marsh included the relevant audio segment in the referral without comment, beyond the timestamp and the context. She was not, she reminded herself, a person who speculated in writing. She was a person who handed material to the people whose job was to determine what it meant, and trusted them to determine it accurately. She thought about it for considerably longer than she would admit to anyone else. The weeks that followed were quiet in the particular way that follows a loud thing, not peace, but its outline. Nathan moved Lily to his sister's home across the city for 3 weeks, while the estate was swept and examined and returned to itself. And during those 3 weeks, he did something he had not done in 2 years. He canceled the projects that weren't urgent, cleared the meetings that didn't matter, and was simply in the same rooms as his daughter for long enough to learn the things she had apparently been waiting to tell him, including the fact that she had named the rabbit after a button that had fallen off her mother's cardigan and never been found, which Lily had considered a good enough reason to name something important. He called Rosa on the 4th day after the arrest. The conversation was longer than the one that had ended her employment, and harder, in a different way. "I don't know how to ask for forgiveness for something this specific," he said, which was, Rosa thought, the most honest thing she had ever heard him say, including 8 years of honest conversations. "You don't start with asking," Rosa said. "You start with understanding, and understanding is going to take longer than one phone call, I know." She knew exactly which buttons to press, Rosa said, and then stopped, aware of the word she had just used, aware of the rabbit sitting on the windowsill of her sister's spare room where she had been staying, watching her from under its uneven ears. She had been watching you long enough to know how to reach you through your grief. That's not your failure, Nathan. That's her crime. You need to know the difference before you can move past it. How do you know the difference? Because you fired me, Rosa said simply, and when you found out the truth, the first thing you did was go to your daughter. Not to defend yourself, not to explain yourself, you went to her. That's the difference. He asked her to come back. She said she would think about it, which was true, and not a no, which she let him hear as the thing it was. She returned 3 weeks later, on a Monday, and Lily met her at the garden gate with buttons under one arm and the orange marmalade jar in the other hand, held up like an offering. "I made it with Rosa from next door," Lily said. "It's not as good as yours, but it's not bad." Rosa took the jar. She looked at the label, which Lily had drawn herself. A rabbit with one ear lower than the other, and underneath it, in careful uneven letters, Buttons brand. "Better with company." Rosa laughed. For the first time in 3 weeks, it came out louder than she intended, and Lily looked very pleased with herself. She looked at the house behind Lily. The estate looked the same from the outside. Same gates, same stone, same garden she had planted half of herself over 8 years. But it felt, already, like a different thing than it had been the last time she stood here. The way a room feels different after it has been through something that rearranges the weight inside it. Lighter in some places, heavier in others, more honestly itself. She went in, she made coffee, she walked the hallways the same way she always had. The way you move through a place that knows your footsteps. By the second day, the routine had reassembled itself around her the way routines do. Gradually, without ceremony, the way most important things come back when you've been away long enough to realize you missed them. The thing she had not expected, coming back, was how much Nathan had changed in 3 weeks. Not in a grand or demonstrative way. He was still a contained, quiet man who expressed most of what he felt through what he built and what he protected, rather than what he said. But he was slower now, in a good way. More present in each room he was in. Less of his attention being subtracted by the phone he used to carry like a second pulse. He cooked dinner 3 times in the first week she was back, which was 3 more times than in the previous year combined. And the results were uneven, but the effort was entirely real. The trial, when it came, was not a thing Rosa spent much time inside. She gave her testimony on one Tuesday morning, in a tone she kept level and factual, and was done in under 2 hours. Lily did not testify. The audio recordings, authenticated and admitted, said everything her voice would have been asked to say, and the judge had made clear, in pre-trial rulings, that she was not going to require a 6-year-old to sit in a courtroom and be cross-examined about a stuffed rabbit when the stuffed rabbit had done the work already. Camille Voss was convicted on all principal charges. The co-conspirator plea bargained. The parallel investigation into the medical timeline was still ongoing at the time of the verdict, and the prosecutor included a statement noting the referral without characterizing its eventual outcome, because it was not a thing anyone was yet in a position to characterize. Nathan sat through the verdict with his hands folded on the table in front of him, and his face very still, and when it was over he walked outside into a gray November afternoon, and stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment before his sister put a hand on his arm and he let himself be led toward a car. He did not feel what most people expected him to feel. He did not feel triumph or relief or the hot vindication of a man whose enemy has been defeated. He felt, instead, the specific and exhausting weight of understanding exactly how much he had failed to see, and for exactly how long, and who had paid the larger portion of the cost. He drove to Rosa's sister's apartment, not his own estate, not his sister's house, but the small apartment where Rosa had been staying for the 3 weeks before she came back, and where she still went on Sundays to have dinner with her family. And he rang the bell, and when Rosa answered, he said, without preamble, "I need to tell you something that I should have said in August when I called to tell you the job was done. I didn't say it then because I convinced myself it was enough to offer the position back. It wasn't enough. Nothing about how I handled that is something I'm going to fix with a paycheck." He stopped, restarted. "I believed her over you because she was standing next to me, and you have always been someone I took for granted as being simply there. The way you take for granted the things that hold everything up until they're gone. I'm ashamed of that, not as a legal or professional matter, as a person, and you deserve to hear me say so clearly without any other point attached to it." Rosa looked at him for a long moment from the doorway. Then she said, "Come in. Dinner's almost ready, and my sister makes too much." He came in. He had dinner at a small round table in an apartment with no chandeliers and no marble and no rooms where silence felt like judgment, with Rosa and her sister and 2 of her nephews and a small brown rabbit sitting on the kitchen counter watching everything with one ear lower than the other. At some point during the meal, Rosa's youngest nephew, 9 years old, deeply interested in Nathan's work for reasons he explained at considerable length, asked whether Nathan had ever designed a building that had a secret in it, a hidden room or a code in the architecture that most people would never notice. Nathan thought about it for a moment. "Not intentionally," he said, "but the best buildings always end up with things in them the architect didn't plan, things the people living in them put there. The building becomes a record of who used it." He paused. "I think most structures are like that. The important things leave a mark. You just have to know where to look." Rosa's nephew nodded, satisfied. Rosa said nothing, but something in her face allowed itself an expression she kept for very few occasions. The expression of someone who has watched a person understand a thing they needed to understand, and is choosing to receive it quietly rather than mark it aloud. On Lily's 7th birthday, 4 months after the trial, she asked for one specific thing, which she presented to her father not as a request, but as a completed plan, with the same matter-of-fact certainty she brought to everything she had decided on. She wanted Button's memory chip replaced with a new one. "The old one has sad things on it," she said. "I want new ones." Nathan ordered the chip online. Rosa helped Lily install it, following instructions Lily had already looked up herself, printed out on a piece of paper she'd folded into quarters and kept in the pocket of her school bag. They replaced the chip on a Saturday morning, at the kitchen table, with the orange marmalade toast and the particular light that came in through the kitchen window, in a way Rosa had always thought made the room seem more generous than its actual dimensions. And when it was done, Lily picked up the rabbit, held it out at arm's length, and said, in her flat, deliberate voice, directly into the fabric near its ear, My name is Lily Cole, and today is my birthday, and I have Rosa, and my dad, and buttons, and that's enough. She pressed a small button on the rabbit's paw that started and stopped the recording. She looked at both of them. There, she said. Now it has a good beginning. The old chip went into the small wooden box where Nathan kept the things he did not look at every day but needed to be able to find. A sealed evidence copy already held by the prosecutor, but this one was Rosa's copy. Her nephew's verification, the original. He placed it in the box without comment, put the box on the shelf in his home office, and closed the door on his way out. He had learned, finally, the thing Lily had been trying to teach him since August by means of one small brown rabbit, one worn belly pocket, and one chip no larger than a thumbnail, that the truth, when it is recorded in the right place at the right time, is more patient than any lie. It will wait as long as it has to, and it will still be there when someone finally knows where to look. If this story made you hold the people you trust a little closer tonight, the ones who show up quietly, who were always there, who you maybe haven't looked at as clearly
Can I
as you
put the
should
star
have,
with Bunny?
leave
Of
one
course,
word in the
sweetie. Let's put
comments
it right
below.
there.
Just
That's a lovely
one.
idea.
Whatever
There.
this made
Now
you
Bunny
feel,
has a star.
we read
Perfect.
every
We
single
love
one.
you.